If I ruled the world, I love 'em, baby.
Welcome to episode number 15 of If I Rule the World podcast. We are sitting here with our guest, Christian Mcknight.
Hello, I made it. It finally happened.
Yeah, it's been a long night. We've been trying to work
happened.
this out.
But it's more than just tonight. We've been talking about this for months. Like, I think the first conversation we had about this was at the Glassjaw show at the Paramount back in December.
That's right.
That happened, yeah.
Let me tell you something, Christian.
Let's hear it.
I've run my mouth a little bit.
I feel like you're
I've been saying to everyone, like, oh, I got to get you on the podcast, but we only do 2 or 3 a month. So the waiting list is getting...
So your invitation was disingenuous when you asked me?
It wasn't disingenuous, and it's not disingenuous with anyone I've asked. I've just misinterpreted how much time we actually have to do it.
It's like when you have a party and you just invite too many people, and you're like, holy shit, I really intended to have five people over, and now there's people on my front lawn because I just invited everybody. You're too much of a nice guy.
It's kind of like a kegger, which is weird for a straight edge kid to talk about.
Yeah, here we go. You just got right into it.
Yeah.
It's a verbal kegger.
Yeah.
It's a verbal kegger. And, Sam's busy. He's got other podcasts and other bands. But it was also a little bit of a runaround to find a quiet spot to do this podcast.
So, do you guys want to set up and tell everybody where we are right now? I mean, does that really lend itself to...
Yeah, we were going to do this at the Paramount. Its Ministry is playing tonight. And that didn't work out because we couldn't find a quiet spot.
Right. And so we said to our buddy Dan Valentino, who runs the fantastic establishment Vaux Hall and Radio, I was like, hey, do you have a quiet spot? And he's like, yeah. Why don't you do it in our, whatever the fuck this place is, why don't you do it in our office? It's definitely an office, more like a stock room. There's
with
lots
a couch.
Couch, lots of sleeping memorabilia, alcohol, and it doesn't smell bad. I would imagine a room like this would smell bad, but it's pretty pleasant.
It's fresh.
Yeah, it's nice.
It looks like just kind of like a college bedroom.
Yeah.
With like lots of alcohol.
Yep. And as hard as it was for us to find a quiet spot, it seemed real easy for them. They're like, yeah, no problem, come upstairs.
Sometimes the most obvious solution is right in front of your face, and you never think of it till you're like,
right.
Such is life, right?
And he's such a tall guy, right in your face at all times. So
yeah.
But yeah, it fucking totally to get to do it. We were gonna do it at the Paramount, but that didn't work out, and I had faith in Christian. I saw him.
Thank you.
Walking around furiously, and I was like, I told George, I was like, you know what?
He said.
I said it, right? I was like, I guarantee you,
Christian.
this motherfucker, I don't know what he's going to do, but he's going to pull something out of his ass, and we're going to be doing a podcast at midnight.
He's going to work it out.
It's kind of the story of my life is pulling it out of my ass.
Yeah.
That's a good segue into what
Speaking of the story of your life.
Okay.
That's a good segue.
There we go.
Christian.
Let's go.
So let's just start out. I mean, I've known you for a long time.
Yeah.
Beyond
of course
bands and different things that I've known you for, I want to start with what your day job is today, and we're going to kind of work backwards into how you first started doing what you do.
Okay.
So what do you do?
I am currently a promoter for a very large company, one of the largest promotion companies in the world. I do concerts. I started doing concerts when I was very young. I'm still doing concerts now. Tonight, the Ministry show was mine. I do about 250 concerts a year.
God damn.
Yeah, I might have just embellished
How many
that
days
number.
a year? Oh, really?
No, it's probably about that. Like when I actually look and figure out, some nights there's none, some nights there's 3 or 4, and there's, Long Island is a market that I book, New York City, New Jersey, and all around. So,
How important is it for you to show your face at these events? Like, let's say there's 2.
A lot of my business really depends. It's, they always say the quote, business of relationships, where a lot of it's like spending face time with the agents or managers, labels, even bands that you don't see a lot. So, what typically happens is we live in New York City. I live in Queens, but the majority of the shows I did was in New York City. Everybody's based in New York City. So one of the big things that I do is go to shows, make sure I see the agent, make sure I see the manager, spend FaceTime, hang out. A lot of times I'll introduce myself to the band. Sometimes I just leave the band alone because I'm like, why do they want to talk to me? But it all depends. But a lot of it is it's a lot of pressing the flesh and shaking hands, kissing babies, saying hello, and just strengthening those relationships.
It seems like the way to go. You don't want to be a ghost.
No.
You want to definitely get relationships and kind of make it like a fun environment somewhat.
True. Yeah. And here's the God's honest truth, and I know this is going to sound so cliche, but I still genuinely love live music. I mean, I got into doing this at a young age because I wanted to be involved in music. I didn't know how. I mean, I tried the band route. I tried a million different routes, but nothing invigorates me like live music does. And I know that probably sounds so corny.
Still to this day.
To this day. Like, and I watch bands that I don't like. You know, like, I mean, one of the trickiest things about what I do now is not being too subjective. Like when you like a band, like when I hear a band, I'm like, you know what? I don't get this, but I know somebody else will. So like you have to, like you can't really use your own interpretation of what you think a band is if they're going to sell tickets or not.
That comes with age, I think.
Sure.
Because like I feel like I'm at that point too where like I don't know, I'm super not judgmental of certain things. Like I get it. Like I'll watch something and I'm like, all right, I don't really understand this band, but like I guess it's tight and fucking people love it. You know? So it's like I don't know, I guess you kind of salute it in a way. It's like it's not for me, but like shit, like, you have to respect someone who's actually doing it, actually touring and getting people to a fucking show these days, which is like almost not impossible, but it's like records don't sell, so everyone's touring. So now it's like a festival market and everyone seems to be chasing the same nickel. That's why it's like so many like combination shows. It's like, okay, we already hit this market, 6 months ago. Now we just need a co-headliner. So I guess everyone's just kind of, instead of having two cars, now they have one. I don't know.
Yeah. And when we were setting up times to do this interview, you were like, I want to see Chelsea Wolfe.
Yeah,
I want to see the opening band.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I figured we'd get to the Paramount and you'd be willingly just cut out. We'll do this interview because you've seen so many shows.
No, I mean,
you don't care, but that's my filter. That's what I would have done.
But let's be honest. It depends on it's the show.
Yeah.
Like, it's obviously the show. Like this is just Ministry. How can you not want to watch Ministry? But also Chelsea Wolfe is somebody I've just been addicted to in the past year. It's just such an important singer and just artist to me. Like just got me through some tough times. Somebody I've listened to a lot. I've never seen, so it just kind of worked out, and I was enthralled watching.
They were great.
Her. Whew, she was just incredible. The whole band was incredible.
And like we were talking about, it's such a like unique sound. Really, like who the fuck else is doing that sound?
No, but it's funny getting back to what you were saying before about what comes with age is being able to recognize merit, but something you might not necessarily like. You can, there's a lot of types of music I listen to now when I have to think about, like, I have to put my business cap on and think, like, I don't get this, but somebody else would, And I remember when I was really young, I tell this story often. Motley Crue was the first concert I ever saw.
Yeah.
And my mom would always scream at me about my hair being too long when I was a kid, which is ironic because I have long hair now. And so the only way that I convinced her to go to the Motley Crue concert would be that I got a short haircut right after the concert, because I guess my mom didn't like the aesthetic of me being a metalhead at 13 and thought it was weird. And, so whatever. I go to the Motley Crue concert. The next day, I get my hair cut. And the lady cutting my hair, I think actually babysat for me, somebody I knew, but she's cutting my hair. And I was telling her how psyched I was on Warrant. And she goes, and she was at the show. Then she goes, Warrant, posers. I don't even know why they're on that show. And 13 years old, Warrant was on the same level as Motley Crue. I didn't know the difference, because they were part of that aesthetic. They had long hair. They were pretty boys. Like, to me, it was all part of the same thing.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and as a kid.
Aesthetically.
Yeah, aesthetic. And of course, now I know the difference. But back then, I didn't know the difference, and I was blown away that she was saying this. I'm like, how are you saying this? You're not a metalhead. I was, like, offended that she was.
Was that the last time she ever babysat you?
Yeah. She didn't babysit. She just cut my hair.
Oh.
But point being was that, like, I remember as a kid telling myself, as I get older, no matter what the genre is, I never want to be that person that just doesn't get it.
Oh, absolutely. I say that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I want to be the person that hits play. Like if I'm going to knock something, it's because I hit play and I was like, it's not for me. And there's a lot of things that are not for me.
Yeah.
But I don't understand the people that think music died in 95. Like, I don't get that. Like, just hit play, and sometimes, like, you'll be surprised of what you're into.
And that is aggravating. That is so frustrating when you have a conversation with somebody and they don't want to give new music a chance, or they just, like, think they're going to hate it. It's like, really? That says something a lot about a person.
And I get this a lot. You must get this a lot. There's a lot of, like, it's cool to reminisce about the old days.
Sure.
But I am faithful without knowing anything. There's kids in a garage right now.
Right.
kicking ass, doing something that we might not understand, but to sit around and be like, yo, it was so much better back then.
Yeah.
This was better and that's better. It's, you like when people like what you did in the past, and you can reminisce about things like shared memories, but that whole like, these kids just don't get it. It's like, yeah, they don't get it, and they shouldn't. They should be doing their own thing, and they are.
I remember, Kill Your Idols has an amazing song, You're Living the Good Old Days Right Now. Like the name of the song's Right Now, but that's the lyric. The chorus is, You're Living the Good Old Days Right Now. And 2 weeks ago, Kill Your Idols played at Brooklyn Bazaar, and I'm watching it. It's Andy West's 51st birthday.
Right.
Andy West from Kill Your Idols is 51 years old. It's incredible. The Watch, Anthony Vinchinque, who was been part of that crew for years, is now a 40-something-year-old guy on top of the crowd.
And is no stranger to being brought up in this podcast in Red River.
And also was at the show tonight.
Was at the show.
So he's on the crowd.
Asterisk to every conversation.
He's on top of the crowd singing along just like he was 25, 26 years ago. Ron Grimaldi, who's also in his mid to late 40s, is also there bugging out. So what I took from that was, I really thought about those lyrics, You're Living the Good Old Days Right Now. 20-something years later, we're all still here. It might be different, the faces might be different, but we're here. And the coolest thing, too, is not only are we here as 40 and 50-something-year-old dudes, but there's younger kids that are keeping that flame alive. And if it wasn't for those younger kids doing their own interpretation of this music, it wouldn't exist. And it wouldn't work.
And they should be doing things that we don't get.
Sure.
They should be doing things that we're like, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's what we did, and that's just how it goes. And, that's how things move along.
I heard Master P, somebody was asking about current hip-hop, and he said the same thing. He's like, we're not supposed to get it. He's like, a lot of people knock on like the younger hip hop artists, but they're doing something that we're not supposed to get because it's a different generation. They're not doing anything wrong. They're doing what they feel like they should be doing. Like just because it might be a little bit different than what we're used to, it doesn't mean there's no merit to it. It doesn't mean there's not a good quality to it. It's just this is their interpretation. The same way we had an interpretation of the music 20, 30 years ago.
The same way I rejected Led Zeppelin. Like when I was a kid, I was like, fuck this. I was like, I'm not listening to this. I'm like, this is not Fugazi. Like, fuck, I didn't have that classic rock bone in me. Now I obviously appreciate it because I'm old. But when I was younger, I rebelled against it. I'm like, whatever's not Fugazi, whatever's not, something that sounds like that. It's like Led Zeppelin. It's like, that's your fucking parents' music. Fuck that shit.
But I also think that's the fallacy of nonconformity, because we got into this music because we don't want to be conformists. I remember hearing that like punk rock isn't for conformists. Punk rockers are somebody who wants to do like something different, think outside of the box. But what
you're 40 years old and on Facebook right now.
But what you're doing, like when you're 18, 19 years old and you're trying to fit into this box of punk rock, you're actually cutting other things out of your life. Because I remember there are so many bands that I like now that I didn't like because those punk rock blinders and those hardcore blinders like didn't let me see outside.
Good point. I didn't like Guns N' Roses till like 2006. Dude. I swear to God, because I was like, nah.
Till everyone left the band?
Yeah.
Dude, what's funny? I say it all the time. Like, I didn't get Quicksand. As weird as that sounds, I like a lot of other music that are way more alternative than Quicksand. But since I knew Walter was in Gorilla Biscuits, I, however old I was the first time I heard them, 16 years old, thought that he should, it should be 1988 Revelation.
Right.
And I didn't get it. Now I love it. And it's funny, like, how I just didn't get it at the time because I had those blinders on. Because I really thought, like, no, this is the box that it fits into. This is what it's supposed to sound like. And it's, obviously things change when you grow and you experience life and you learn things. But it is funny how anybody you ask that grew up in a scene, I bet you there was stuff that they probably didn't like that they love now, and they were just like, oh, it's too punk rock to get it at the time.
Yeah, you are like, there's the idea, the ethic of nonconformity when you walk towards punk rock and hardcore, but it's just a microcosm of the world in which you then adapt these things. Correct. And some of that is closed in the outside world, and that's great because you learn a certain thing. You learn a certain, side of yourself in hardcore, and that makes you that person.
Yeah.
But you get older, and maybe missed a thing or two
right
because of it, but you gained a thing or two. So
sure.
We grew
50-50,
up in that world,
and I say it a lot, like hardcore, Long Island hardcore was my college. Like I didn't go to college traditionally like a lot of people did. I did the community college thing, but that was where I really like learned a thing or two. That's really where like I sharpened my teeth. I got my sea legs. I really became an independent person through being in the scene. And I think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people they really grow up in that scene because if you think about it, starting a band is like starting a business in a lot of aspects.
Yeah.
So you're doing this entrepreneurial thing where, a lot of times in bands people assume roles. There's the business person in the band, there's a creative person in the band, there's a person that just gets drunk all day and just shows up to band practice whenever they want, but you learn that at a young age, and that's how you learn how to be a business person. And for me, that's what happened. Like when I was, even though I did shows before I was in Cleanser, which was my first real band, my whole life, that's all I really wanted to do. I thought I was going to be a rock star. And I'm not saying this for sympathy. I'm a terrible singer, and I know that, and for
Welcome
years,
to my world.
but for years, I tried being in this band, and I knew that I was an awful singer, and everybody in my band resented me because I was a bad singer, but I was the business person in the band.
Right.
I was the one that did everything. I was the one that had the entrepreneurial spirit. I was the one that booked shows, booked the flights, got everything together.
You need that guy.
Yeah, you need that guy. And because I had such a close camaraderie with my bandmates, they were in a situation where they definitely wanted to kick me out, but they couldn't because I did everything. And then when the band eventually imploded, I realized as much as I want to be the creative guy, as much as I want to do this, that's not me. I'm better behind the scenes. I'm better booking the shows. I'm better making the things happen because that's what I'm good at. I'm not good at, singing on a record or doing whatever. It just didn't work for me like that. So I had to find another way to be involved, just not the way that I wanted or initially planned.
That's an interesting point. I mean, I don't know. That's a hard thing to come across. I mean, how long did it take you to really accept that? Because that's like a heavy thing.
Did you ever hear a Cleanser record the first time? Well, I mean, listen, and I got to be honest too. Cleanser was a very difficult band for anybody to be in because that was my first time really in a band, and you're talking about really, really amazing musicians that wanted to mix it up and do something different. So they were coming up with these really complex timings and and things that I just was not capable of doing. And even if I was in a band that was more straight ahead and straightforward, that might have worked a little bit better for me.
Right.
But that I just couldn't do, And I mean, George, I grew up idolizing dudes like you that were in bands that were definitely not common bands, that were not straightforward bands that did something interesting and different. And I tried so hard to emulate that. It just couldn't do it because I didn't even have the talent to sing in the first place. So it was really different and hard to do anything because I lacked the basic skill to be in a band.
But that was the amazing thing about hardcore.
Yeah.
If you look at a lot of underground scenes.
Totally.
If you look at the rave scene.
Yeah.
You need a lot more than just effort to get it going. You need money.
Yeah.
You need certain things. In hardcore, the great thing about it was, let's say you weren't really a good singer, you could sing anyway and figure it out.
Sure.
You could start a fanzine. You could book shows.
Yeah.
You could be involved to some degree in a way that I don't think a lot of other scenes, I don't know how many other scenes there are out there, but you could do that. And then you kind of brought up the point of it being like your college.
Yeah.
And look at what you just talked about, starting in a band, figuring out what your worth is, your relationship with everyone, and then ultimately you're here, you're in the music business.
Yeah.
Because you started in a band, because you kind of went for it.
Right.
And that's kind of, what I was brought out of hardcore was that there's no shows, let's do a show here in a basement.
Right.
Let's do a show in a VFW hall.
Yeah.
There's a do-it-yourself ethic that I deal with to this day. It's I can't get something done. I think that college just makes you feel like we can just get it done. We can just do it.
Yeah.
We have faith in Christian.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can get it done, basically. It's we need a show. We have no place to go. Almost like we need to do a podcast. We're gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I said I'm like this guy. I'm like I have complete faith in Christian. I'm like I don't know what he's gonna do, but he's gonna find us a place.
Well, that's like when you're a promoter.
You booked a venue for the podcast.
Yeah, yeah. When you're a promoter and you get yourself into pickles, I mean, there's times I think back upon different situations in my life, and I don't know how I got out of them. I mean, you know, especially too when you're 20 years old, 21, maybe even younger. You're doing business things that somebody at that young age don't know how to do.
Right.
Like you're renting at a venue. Sometimes you're getting insurance. Sometimes, unfortunately, you're not getting insurance. You're getting a PA. You're getting a band. You're getting contracts in the mail from the band. You know, you're in this position that you're probably maturity-wise not ready to be in, and also like life experience-wise, you're not ready to be in. But you have to adapt.
Right.
But, you know, like you have to do it, you know, and that's like I was saying being in a band before being in a band, because it's like, you know, you're in a band and all of a sudden, like, you need a vehicle to get the band around. So you're leasing a car or a van and, you know, or you're incorporating the band. You're doing things that, like, you never thought you would do at that young age, but out of necessity, you have to do it.
Right.
And, you know, and that's what, to me, like, you know, my necessity was, you know, when I realized the band thing really wasn't going to work out for me. And I dived headfirst into booking shows. And I tried other things. You know, I put out the first Glass Show record and, you know, and did that. And I tried booking some tours that I failed miserably at. But then, like, when I really started booking shows, you know, when you found yourself in a situation where it's like, okay, I have a band coming from wherever, you know, like from Georgia. I don't think anybody knows who they are here, but the whole idea of punk rock is we accept everybody. We want to give this band a show. Let me find some local bands that they can play with. And then, you know, like I book a VFW hall and the VFW hall calls me the night before and says, holy shit, I forgot. We can't do your show. We double book bingo, you know, like... like literally those things would happen all the time, you know, or like, you know, I mean, there's a million stories I can tell about booking VFW halls, and I have 3 or 4 shows booked up at that VFW hall, but the guy will call me up and be like, we can't do the Battle of the Bands anymore because our cafeteria last night was set up as an infirmary, you know, like, because, you know, people were hurt, you know, like, you know, because, you know, you would do shows and people would get their mosh and they would hurt themselves, and these old men would be like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
You know, like...
Was there anybody before you fully committed to like doing shows that was doing the same thing, like that you looked up to? I
don't know. It's like, you know, obviously Artie Failey was before me. I don't know that I really looked up to Artie. I mean, I think Artie's, you know, cool. I like Artie, and he definitely provided a very... Like, he's a very important person. I mean, if without Artie, there's no Long Island scene. But I don't know that I ever, like, looked at him and said, like, I want to do that. You know?
We didn't think of him as, like, a booking agent or anything.
No,
like
I
that.
didn't think of, I thought he was just, like, somebody that made it
Booked
happen.
shows,
you know, he made it happen. And then eventually, you know, like, I really, you know, I mean, kind of going back to my roots, you know, one of the things I forgot to mention was before I did Cleanser, me and Josh Swank, who I was in Cleanser with, rented out a warehouse and started to have shows there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's called the UN, the Underground Network. I was
Network.
Underground Network. Me and Swank were both 18. We were in college. You know, we're not in college. We were seniors in high school. And I didn't, you know, and Artie was booking shows at that time, but we did that just because, like, we were like, well, no, we want to be involved in the scene. We want to make stuff happen also. Like, you know, there's... You know, and, you know, Josh was a little more in the rave stuff at the time, but we were like, hey, we're going to rent the warehouse. And we're going to have punk rock shows and hardcore bands. And, you know, and it worked pretty well for a warehouse that was completely illegal. You know, like, to eventually got shut down. We're like, hey, you can't do this anymore. But, you know, but I mean, that's, you know.
But the Underground Network, while we're on it, what was it? Because it was huge empty space.
Yeah. It was,
and it was shows, but people were living there. Like, there was a lot. I feel like there's more going on than shows.
Yeah,
there.
basically,
Or
I
the
remember
idea
talking
was
to
more
you
than
about it, like
shows.
us hanging out and being like, hey.
I didn't have somewhere to live at that
point.
point.
Yeah,
so
we talked about us living there. Nobody ever actually wound up living
like
there.
100 degrees.
Yeah, nobody ever wound up actually living there because it was just a raw warehouse space. There wasn't much there. You know, we weren't handy at the time. We didn't know how to build things. So the only thing that we built was a stage from some stolen lumber. And we built the stage. We, you know, borrowed a PA or rented a PA and built some skate ramps and, you know, had some raves. And I mean, all in all, I mean, when I think back about bands I played there, like, you know, Bouncing Souls played there, Sick of It All played there, Snapcase, Earth Crisis, Mouthpiece, obviously Silent Majority, Vision of Disorder, Latex Generation. I believe you guys probably did. Might Never Matter. Do you remember that? I don't remember if you did.
I don't know if we did.
Yeah, I can't remember. But either way, in the summer of '94, that was the spot. That was the precursor to the PWAC.
Yeah.
Even though the first PWAC show was the day Kurt Cobain died in 1994. So what is that? April. I'm gonna say this wrong, and people are gonna blow me up on the internet. A day in April 1994. That was the first PWAC show, which was Mind Over Matter. My first band, Crawl Space.
Big Sniff.
Yeah, Big Sniff. Silent Majority.
Not Silent Majority.
Really? Huh. I thought so.
You know what? I could be wrong.
Yeah.
I'm constantly corrected on these things.
Yeah.
But I booked it.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
and you put us on. You put Crawl Space on. My first band.
It was 4 or 5 bands.
It's 5 bands.
5 bands.
Yeah.
But it was like, it wasn't the PWAC as we know. It was just an open space.
Sure.
So we did it there. But you had a big part of the PWAC.
I don't think so.
No?
I was involved.
You did that record store.
I did a record store. Yeah, I mean, I was involved in the sense that I was always around, and I definitely didn't do shows at the PWAC.
Okay.
Like I wasn't part of like
Common
that,
Ground Collective.
Yeah, that part. Like, I mean, they, because the other thing I forgot to mention too. Yeah, a lot of stuff that I'm leaving out here. Before I was in Cleanser, the other so this warehouse space shuts down in like September of '94. In February of '95, I opened up a record store called Halo Zero Records with this awesome dude named Brian Cancellaria, who unfortunately has passed away since, who had a store in a flea market. And I was like, thought it was so cool. The flea market was shutting down. We found some retail space down the block, opened it up there. He was super into the industrial goth scene. I was super into the hardcore scene. And we had a record store called Halo Zero that's actually across the street from what is now the Witch's Brew. And which is funny, I remember like years ago talking to the awesome sisters that own the Witch's Brew, and they were saying that when they first like looked for spots, it was great because it was across the street from our record store. Obviously, the Witch's Brew has been open 20-something years and is like a huge establishment on Long Island.
Yeah.
And we were just there for a couple of months. But either way, that was like my second foray into business was opening up this record store. So since I had all this inventory left over from the store closing down, and also Brett from None of the Above also had some inventory, we decided to take what we had and open up a store in the back room of the PWAC. And that was like, in 95, 96 when the PWAC like became an established venue and was open for a few years.
All right.
Or a year.
What was the first show you booked?
The first show that I ever booked was it was at the Common Ground. It was not Common. Sorry, it was at the Underground Network. It was VOD. I can't remember. Maybe. Oh man, Jody Crutch I think was another band that played, and that was like '94, and I was 17 when that happened. And then there was like a Jody Crutch show with like the Souls. Those was like the first few shows I remember booking.
It's not bad, Christian.
Yeah.
Some people are like, my first show was a Dirt Toilet. And,
No, there was a lot of Dirt Toilets after that. Believe
some
me,
of those bands went on to have great careers.
Yeah.
but the point is that like I'm who I am because I grew up in a great scene. All credit of my success is due to what I came up around. Was due to the examples of other people, what they were doing, due to the bands. I mean, like when I often tell people what I do, because when I tell people how long I've been booking shows, a lot of times they don't believe me.
Yeah.
They're like, that's
well, what's
crazy.
the number?
It's 17, and I'm 20. I'm 42
22.
now, so 25 years at least.
That's crazy.
It's a lot of years, yeah.
And, part of the reason that we wanted to talk to you is because, most of interviews are going to be the band.
Sure.
And band members and stuff like that. And I think most band members that we know, large and small, know you because you've been a part of their booking and in some way a part of their success to the biggest bands we can think of. I could think, Taking Back Sunday jumps to mind, but you're already up to like booking Misfits,
yeah,
and things like that. But it's behind the scenes thing. It doesn't always get like the credit.
Yeah.
And none of that stuff can happen without people like you.
Sure.
It's such a frustrating thing. I maybe booked 10, 15 shows in my life, and like it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Like, what are some of the things that happen with booking shows that people don't understand? Like, everybody has an opinion about the show should have went like this, and like, what's fucking frustrating for you?
A couple of things. I mean, one thing I'll never forget is when I really was like in the thick of it, like in the late '90s, and just doing a lot of shows. Jamie Haybreed, Jamie Josta, amazing dude, was booking a lot of shows in Connecticut. So a lot of times, we would talk about stuff, and I would do something, and he would try to do stuff together. But he said to me, he was like, "Dude, this is a thankless job. Never forget that." Yeah. Never forget. And that stuck in my head. That he said that. And at the time, he was a big deal too. Haybreed was a big band, but he was a very entrepreneurial guy. He had he had the label. He was doing shows. Yeah, he's an amazing, just a business person that just had all these different things going on. And he, I remember him saying that to me, like, never forget this is a thankless job. And that was never more clear to me in the late 90s, where no matter what I did, I felt like I was under the microscope and people just talk shit about me.
Right.
You
didn't book my band.
I didn't book your band.
You're
fucked up
you're
this
an
show.
elitist. You're part of this
Yeah.
scene. Yeah.
Yeah. Every single thing that you can think of, I remember being yelled at because, I booked bands that, that were questionable, that had questionable ethics, bands that, whatever the reason is, I just remember no matter what, you could never make anybody happy.
This band, you put me on second, I should have been third.
Yeah.
We didn't get, the time. It seems like such a frustrating thing that I think people underestimate how difficult it is to pull it off consistently.
It's hard, man. It's hard because you're dealing with a lot of personalities. You're dealing with a lot of I remember being in a band and fighting about our slots, and I'm embarrassed now because when I had that back on me and people were like, "What do you mean we're playing first?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I mean, thank God what I do now, most of packages are just given to me. Yeah, and it's like I don't really have to think about that. It's like, okay, this band's playing for. I'm not. That's not what
ministry.
I do.
You're on it at about 7.
Yeah,
yeah. It's not like now it's not like I'm figuring it out myself. I'm being told, okay, this is the package. This is who's playing first and second. But I remember back in those days, figuring that out, and then it's true. Then there's so many people that I would hear, yo, this dude was talking a ton of shit about you. But then when that person would see me, they'd be totally cool because they felt like they had to.
Right.
They had to be nice to me. So I put their band on a show, but I knew what they were saying about me. And, listen, I had an ego, of course, one of the things I was saying to you before, I kind of believe the hardcore scene is such an interesting place. And one of the things that I believe, from listening to people like Eckhart Tolle, I saw that, Power of Now guy. Incredible. I saw him speak 2 weeks ago.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And it was incredible. And I got really into him in the past year or so. But anyway, one of the things he talked about is how people create their own narrative of who they are in their head.
Right.
And I think about that all the time. And when you're in this hardcore scene where there's this very very drawn out characters, I know that I definitely thought who I was in my head. I was the dude that booked shows, I pulled things off even though I wasn't supposed to. I was a little bit unorthodox. I was a maverick. Yeah. I wasn't the best looking dude. I wasn't the best dressed looking dude, but I knew everybody, and I would say off color things because I'm a weird person. And, I was just this character who was Christian Cleanser, then became Christian Feet First because that was the name of the company. I did Feet First. And I remember thinking this is who I am, and everyone should know who I am, And, I definitely had an ego, and I had to be brought down to size at some point when I realized I was fucking certain things up and I wasn't really booking shows the right way. Maybe I wasn't really booking shows what was best for the show. I was using some of my ego to get in the way. Maybe if I did hear a band talk shit about me, even though that band was popular, I wouldn't book them. I definitely was guilty of that. And you learn that stuff as you grow up and you grow older and you realize the mistakes you made because we all make mistakes as we grow up. And one of the fantastic things about being in your 40s is being able to turn around and be like, oh my gosh, I did this back when I was younger, right? And I'm a grown up now, or I think I'm a grown up now, and I'm never gonna go down that path again, And
isn't that a thing? Especially if you're talking about Eckhart Tolle, the thing that gets you all those things, gets you those big shows, that ego, the bigger than life personality, gets you those things, but maybe you really aren't there quite yet. And maybe when you get older, you can sort of shorten that thing, who you really are and your big ego, and it starts to collapse a little bit. And then it's just you just are who you are. Right. And you know how to turn it on. It's a business deal. I gotta be like this, but I know that's not really who I am. And then, when you're hanging out with your friends, you're a certain way. And, these are just roles. These are just roles we play. Gets you through a certain thing. But with age, you sort of like shorten that distance a little bit.
Yeah, true. And, one of the things, obviously, Eckhart Tolle.
No, that's by all means. It's midnight. We're supposed to get real deep.
Yeah.
No, but one of the things that Eckhart Tolle talks about is that he speaks a lot about the egoistic mind and how, the basis of everything he talks about is the power of now being in the moment. And one of the things we obviously do is we let past interpretations, things in our head, affect what we do right now.
Right.
And I know I can tell you that when I was in my mid-20s, everything that I did was based off of A, who I thought I was, or B, how I thought somebody interpreted me. You know, like I would never take a situation for what it was. I would never take it for hey, we're in a good conversation right now, I'm going to go with it. I was thinking of, what I thought about that person, what I thought that person thought of me. Yeah. And it's like
that's a tough place to be sometimes.
Yeah, it's you worried about the future, worried about the past, worried about the future, worried about the past. That's all you think about. And it's just, projecting and thinking about other things, and it's tough to be right in that moment.
It's impossible.
I think we briefly spoke on Facebook about it, but I do like today and maybe tomorrow. Those are the only things I never think about, like the past anymore. Like I really just don't. I'm like always.
But not even like the big past, like of a band or something like that. But just little things that come into your mind of like your job, you stubbed your toe, like why you can't do this thing is because I tripped over the coffee table this morning, and what happens is that coffee table is always there, and like you don't realize a story that you're creating about that whole thing and the future, instead of like that moment where you can just actually live and appreciate that moment, and just be like, I stubbed my toe, no big deal. And it is a thing that hopefully as you get older you sort of collapse that divide.
What I was saying is, though, like as it pertains to when you're younger, and you're in this scene, this world, and that is, like you have your whole world revolves around the scene. You know, you ever think about that? Like how when we were younger, like every single thing that I did revolved around the Long Island hardcore scene. Whether if I was going to Chili's, I was going with my friends from the scene. Like if I had nothing to do, I was going to a show. Like that's all I did. Like my whole life revolved. And because I booked shows, like everything I did was involved in that. So I found myself like so immersed in that world that I couldn't detach myself from that. And it's funny now, like, I feel like whenever I go anywhere, like on Long Island, I always talk to people that just want to talk about the glory days.
Yeah.
And I don't mind that, but there's a part of me where I'm just like, what are you up to now? Like, let's talk about now, like, and it becomes like a little bit like, to me, it becomes like, come on, there's like better we had great times back then, but like there's so much more to like me and you can talk forever about a lot of things.
Sure.
Me and you, when we see each other, we're not just like, yo, remember that time I drove day in the life to New York, upstate or whatever, like, because we don't have to do that, and I don't know, I just think that a lot of times there's a lot of reminiscing about and they're great good old days, don't get me wrong, but I feel like I'm so entrenched, and you are too, probably to certain people, that, when I'm at a show, and I'm at a show every day, if somebody sees me, they're just like, oh my gosh, remember that show that time Newfound Glory paid the Long Island Zoo, or remember that, whatever it is, they just want to talk about those glory days. And I'm like, that's cool.
Part of the thing that's been great about doing this podcast is there is sort of like, you think 20 years ago, there's a certain thing, and then there's like a glory days thing, and then a reliving, and then new bands and stuff like that. What I heard you say, and I heard other people say, like now that I'm going to be 45 in May, you can just appreciate it.
Yeah.
You just talk about it like, hey, that was fun.
That was fun.
And it really feels like a good moment in time to talk about, and then, talk about what else is going on. And it's just nice. It's not attached to other things in the way I think that it used to be. And that's, obviously part of what the podcast is some of that.
Sure.
But it just, if I did this even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it would have such a different attachment to the past.
Because all that stuff, it's mile markers. It's not a destination.
Yeah.
Like it's a mark on the road. It's a mark on the map. It's not the red dot. Like you're not here yet. Like it took all of that to get me to this point.
Yeah.
It took all of like years and years and years of doing, basement shows, VFW hall shows, underground shows, fucking things up to get to the point now where I get to book huge bands. I get to book bands that I've like worshipped my whole life. I get to book Ministry, who I remember seeing the first time on TV, like, in the early 90s. I get to do these incredible things because of all of the things that I've done in the past. And thank God I've made those mistakes. And thank God that I figured all that stuff out back then, because that's how it got me to this point.
Yeah.
When you do what I do, like when you do big shows, there's a lot of concepts and ideas that happen that are talked about for years upon years upon years before they actually come to fruition, and reunions is one of those things where, like, you might have the idea as a promoter, this would be an amazing idea, but the band might not be at that point. So a lot of times when it comes to certain things, it takes a long time before it actually comes to fruition, because a lot of things involved.
How do you start setting something like that up? Like, is it just like you contact management? Like, what if they don't exist anymore?
I mean, it's twofold. As a promoter, that I don't do festivals anymore. One of the things that I should probably we'll talk about is I used to do a festival called Bamboozle, and Bamboozle is what eventually led me to my job now, and that was my first foray into something really big and commercial and just this larger than life entity that I was involved in. But when I booked Bamboozle, one of the things that we did was we would do reunions. We would think, hey, it would be amazing for the Movie Life, who hadn't played at that point, to get back together, or trying to think of some other ones. But I think maybe Further Seems Forever, bands that just broke up that we really wanted to play because they fit into that aesthetic of that festival. So, I mean, obviously money, like you send somebody money or you have a conversation. That's usually how those things start. I mean, you can sniff out, too, the bands that just have no interest of ever reuniting, or the ones where there's like a couple of curious guys. It's like, it usually takes like, at least half the band to be like, maybe, and there's always one holdout, and, and that's how it happens.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
But, yeah. So,
yeah, I mean, Sam and I were talking about, we always try and figure out like how anybody makes money in this business.
Yeah.
And like, how does it work? If there's a show that you're a talent buyer, is that what you do?
Yeah, I'm a talent buyer.
So like, you get shows, like what happens if, there's a snowstorm and people don't come, or, there's a bunch of shows that people don't show up, or like, how does that work? You have guarantees for bands, and then like you have to buy a whole show, and then who eats it when it's a tough show?
Well, I can say this, like, I was an independent promoter for a long time. When you're an independent promoter for a long time, you eat it a lot. And it's really, really tough. Unless you have some serious backing, or, you just have a lot of successful shows, eventually most independent promoters I know work for a big company. You kind of have to.
Right.
Because at that point, you're protected. You're not worrying about, like, if a show bombs that you got to go pay. So, and also, too, the other thing, obviously, when you're an independent promoter, all you're actually doing, the only money you're making is you're making money from the door. You're not making money from the bar. You're not making money from any of the sources.
Right.
So as an independent promoter, it is so hard to make that money. And eventually, most people that I know that, like, if they don't go work for somebody else, they buy a bar, they buy a club. You have to do that because you need those other sources of revenue to pay for a lot, to keep this ship afloat. I know a lot of people that, like, eventually either give up doing shows, or at some point they just buy a venue, and obviously if you live in another part of the country, it's much easier to do that than it is in New York, because everything is so expensive here.
Good point.
But, but I know a lot of people that, like, in other parts of the country that eventually, like, that started as an independent promoter and eventually just bought their own venue, because you could do it if you're living in, like, a place that's not as ungodly expensive as New York.
I was watching the other day. It was interview with Ian McKay.
Yeah.
And then I was remembering, like, there was this big thing that he definitely was consistent about. $5 all ages.
Yeah.
And then I was like, that was so amazing to me when I was younger. But I was thinking about that now, and I'm like, I wonder if he still does that, number one. Number two, I'm like, that's impossible on the East Coast or Northeast. Like, do you see a flaw in that?
It's funny. Somebody said to me the other day, they talked about Fugazi, and they were like, I wonder if Fugazi's not a band anymore because it would be impossible to do the $5 or $6 shows now.
It would be, for them, even $15.
Yeah.
If you tripled what they were talking about.
Yeah.
And then all ages. Like, it doesn't make someone an asshole. It's 21 and over. It's just like, these are the laws in the state.
I know.
Insurance.
And the craziest thing, I'll say this. what is really interesting as being somebody who came from the hardcore scene, DIY, very ethical scene, to all of a sudden working for a company where, I have to sometimes do 21 plus shows. That was the craziest thing.
Yeah.
Because it was so ingrained in my head that music is for everybody. Like, you have to have a place that's welcoming for all ages. Every single person should be able to come, including a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old if they want to come. You
Right.
don't turn anybody away. So when you got to that place and you realize that, like, it doesn't exist, that's tricky, man. That's hard.
Right.
And you're like, it doesn't work like that, and that's why I'm glad, like we said before, there is a hardcore scene that still exists, and that does exist for younger kids that they're getting involved with, last night I managed a kid named Kevin Burke. He goes by the name Edmund, and he was in a band for a little bit. When he was 15, he started a band when he was him and his friend. What's his name? Chris Regan, Chris Regan's now in the movie life and plays with 4 Year Strong sometimes. Like, these kids literally started a band when they were 15. I was talking to Kevin's mom last night, and she was telling me about how she used to let him go on tour when he was 15. And he turned 23 yesterday, so it's only 8 years ago. Point being, though, it's alive and well. It's happening. Like, these kids are still forming bands. They're still, they're still doing what we did when we were younger. Now it's probably just harder for them because it's much harder to get a spot that's cheaper,
Yeah.
And also we fucked up every VFW all on Long Island.
But they'll figure it out. Just like,
yeah, they figure it out.
The least that there is to do is the best time.
Yeah.
That's when kids figure out, because music on Long Island was better is because we had garages and shit.
Yeah.
You could say in New York City was better music for many years. And then on Long Island, something came out of it because we were separate and detached and didn't have places to play and all of that. And then something broke out of that. So I never really got into the whole thing of the music scene sucks. It's that's when the best shit comes out. It's just time and time again. That's how it is.
And the suburbs always are happening. If you think about hardcore, if you think about the amazing fucking hardcore scenes, Connecticut has an amazing hardcore scene. Had it, I don't know if it still does, but Connecticut, New Jersey, Long Island, obviously, Pennsylvania and other parts of Philly, Florida, even North Carolina. I remember going to
Sure.
that spot. What was it, in Greensboro? 533 uprisings. Code
that's
7. Yeah, Code 7. And remember there was this weird Long Island North
Absolutely.
Carolina connection, because what happens is in cities places that are not cities, you don't have that constant stream of activity. You don't have a lot to do. So when you're a bored 17, 18-year-old kid, and you're not getting drunk in the woods, you're learning how to play bass in your friend's basement, and you finally realize okay, you know what, everybody else is bored, let's have shows. And I can't remember her name, but somebody wrote an amazing book a bunch of years ago. I remember seeing her speak at the Free Space, but it was about how the suburbs are happening and how a lot of scenes start in suburbs because that's where the kids are the most bored. And even though the cities have a lot of creativity and there's a lot of places to play, there's still a lot of stimuli. We don't have that stimuli out here, so that's why we created these amazing scenes.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. Just out of curiosity, so in the 90s, you're doing Feet First, right?
Yeah, I would say the feet. So I was born breech, which means feet first. So I actually started doing Feet First in 19. I would say 99 was the first show I actually remember calling it Feet First. Yeah.
And then so right around that time, you're plugging away, and you said right before Bamboozle, all that other stuff before you get into what you're doing now. Was there ever a time, because it's such a thankless job, like you said, was there ever a time that you were just this fucking scene kind of sucks, I don't really want to do it anymore?
It wasn't.
Did you have a B plan?
Yeah, it wasn't really so much. It was when I started doing bigger things that weren't scene bands, because once I broke out of that. Sorry, I shouldn't say broke out of that. Once I started doing additional things, I never stopped being a hardcore kid. I always, have that, and I still go to, try to go to hardcore shows when I can. But when I started doing bigger things and the bands got more expensive and there was a lot more responsibility and it was a different set of problems, that's when I was I don't know if I can do this. One of the things that, I'm not, secretive about is that in 2003 I booked a show at Sports Plus with the Used that got closed down because it was the craziest thing I'd ever been involved with. And the show got shut down essentially because it was a week after the Great White Thing happened in New England, in Rhode Island. And, you know, the place, Sports Plus, had problems with, like, the local, like, fire department. And they were just not ran correctly. I mean, that place is closed down. They just were not ran correctly. And they totally fucked up with how they were administering the bracelets. So anyway, it was tickets for the shows, right? We sold a bunch of tickets.
I was at
and
that
then
show.
That day, what we basically did was, if you had a ticket, you would get a bracelet so you can come to the show. What they did was they bought their bracelets from the Party City across the street. The venue did this because they were like, hey, our rules, our venue, this is what we have to do. They fucking bought the bracelets from Party City, and we found out that Party City sold about 10 boxes, and each box had 500 bracelets. And there was way more people than we thought, and it was a shit show, you know. And I was on tour with Take It Back Sunday. Anthony Race, who's been my right-hand man and now is a production manager for us, and he's an incredible guy, calls me up, and he's like, we're getting shot down by the cops. And I was like, what? Like, how? And sure enough, like, you know, he, like, you know, told me what was happening. I think that was before camera phones, so he couldn't even, like, send me a picture of the mayhem. But they were like, there's much more than the 2,000 tickets we sold in here. And I remember, like, you know, the next day I got on a plane and I flew home. And I remember I had News 12 called me, and I mean, I lost about $40,000 through that whole scenario. Jesus. And I was 27? Yeah, 27. And I was decimated. You know, like, I never thought that I was going to come up for air again. And, you know, at the time, I was dipping my toe into management, and I was, like, trying to manage that band Under Oath. And that's what I was doing in addition to, you know, I was tour managing. Like I said, I was on the road with Take It Back Sunday from Autumn Ashes, but I was trying to manage Under Oath, and I eventually that didn't work out. But Randy Nichols, who now manages Under Oath, who's one of my best friends, who took over Under Oath because I just couldn't do it. My head was so swamped from losing that much money.
Yeah.
The first bit of money I got was a couple of years later. Randy, like, because I helped him get the band, gave me an envelope with $2,000. Like, came over my house Christmas and gave me $2,000, and that was the first bit of money I got back after I lost that much money.
Right.
And if it wasn't for Randy giving me that envelope with $2,000, I never would have got back on my feet.
Randy
Nichols, he's a Long Island guy. He manages
Yeah.
Under Oath and a bunch of bands.
Okay.
He's just a dude. Me and
Beach
Randy,
Slang.
Yeah, Beach Slang. He's amazing. He's, you know, I was the
They
best.
were trying to get him on Red River podcast. Well, Parker was.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they're friends. Yeah. Me and Randy met. Because I had an Avail patch on my hoodie when Green Day played at Nassau Coliseum in 1994, and he commented, and the first conversation me and Randy ever had was about Avail and Sunny Day Real Estate. You
Nice.
know, and now he's like one of my best friends. You know, I was the best man in his wedding. But again, that also goes back to this camaraderie that hardcore kids and punk kids have. You know, like when you're walking around the mall and you see somebody wearing a Gorilla Biscuit shirt, and you don't know them, but you give them a head nod.
Right.
You know, or you're
absolutely.
Or you're like, you know, you're like 19 and you're at Disney World and you see a kid, like, you know, wearing a Judge shirt or an Avail shirt, and you're just like, what's up? You know, like, it's that camaraderie that we all have, that, like, we're in this group that not a lot of people know about, but, like, we're all on the same page.
Yeah, I remember in Manhattan a billion years ago, you saw someone with Doc Martens and a flight jacket. You knew they were going downtown. You'd probably, like, go to the same place. I mean, eventually it wasn't like that anymore, but there was just a thing of a little bit of camaraderie.
Yeah, totally. It's funny, about 2 years ago, I don't even know who this dude is, but I see him now. I've never noticed him in my life. When I was going to Riot Fest to see the Misfits, there was a dude that I didn't know him. He looked like he was a little bit older than me. He was tattooed, had a skateboard, and I just knew he was getting on a plane to go to. It was at LaGuardia. He was getting on a plane to go see the Misfits, and I was like, "Hey, are you on the blah 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 flight to Chicago?" And he looked at me and he's like, "Yeah." Didn't even, like, ask how I knew. Like, I just knew he was going to the same place because, like, I just spotted him out.
You could do, yeah.
Real recognize real, Christian.
Well, when you go to, like, festivals too, like, you're like a zillion blocks away, and you're like, oh, these people are definitely walking 100 blocks like we are.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, there's definitely there's that amazing camaraderie that, you know, that I think a lot of people in scenes have. You know, I'm sure that exists in other scenes, you know, like, but something about hardcore though, you know, specifically that like the brotherhood, the sisterhood, that just like, you know, like, I mean, the people that I know from the hardcore scene are just, you know, some of my best friends, you know, and like, and even though you don't see them on like a regular basis, it's just this common thread that you have with these people that, you know, that like, that just, I feel like they get me, you know, like somebody that like, I don't know how to describe that or if that makes any sense, but I just feel like we come from the same, like, again, college, we come from the same school.
And it is too. And even though you and I were talking in the Paramount about like some of our old friends, we were talking about like negativity, right? Like people being negative. And it's like, if people listen to us right now, you might think it sounds like we're being like, oh, we all love each other and it's all positive. It's not even necessarily that. We just get each other.
Yeah, we do.
We might be the most miserable people to each other sometimes, or like, you know, little, you know, conflict and bitchy or whatever. But we love each. You know, it's just like you know your old friend, your brother you can't get rid of. You know, it's just, I love that dude. I don't give a fuck. He's annoying, but whatever. And it's like it's just an old, you know, a long-term friend thing, and you're like, it's fine. You know? Love that guy.
It's funny. You know what's really funny? Like, often when you introduce somebody like that you've known to somebody who's not like a scene person, like, how do you know that person? You know, like, and it's weird to be from the scene. But, you know, but I always like, I was like, you know, how do you not know that person? That person's from around. You know, they were always around. And it's like, you know, it's, even though like, I don't have those moments with everybody like the first time I met Randy, but I remember the first time I met Sam. Me and Sam went to go see Public Enemy together. Yeah. Like, you know, that was the first time I remember. I mean, I know you because you're in a band, and I idolize Mind Over Matter. But, you know, I know a lot of people the first time I met them. A lot of people like don't have that like recollection of the first time I met them, but they were just always around.
Right. It doesn't diminish how much you know them. It's just like, I don't remember the exact moment I met them,
but they were always there. They were a fixture of the scene. They were just their face was an intricate part of the scene because they were always there. You know, they were one of the people that like kept the ship afloat. You know.
Yeah, and it's funny now. Like you know, it graduates from being like, you know, a face to now like social media, and you're like, oh shit, like, that's the guy from shows with the shitty opinions.
Yeah, and you know what's funny too? You ever have this phenomenon when you actually like, you know, when you're part of a scene, you see the same people over and over again, and it's funny how at some point you start saying hi to that person. You know, like, I remember like thinking that all the time.
It's too late to ask their name.
Right? Yeah. Oh my God. You know how many people I just have no idea who their name is? Yeah. Like,
it's way too late. Yeah. Like, I know this guy. I love this
guy.
But
you've seen them. But a lot of times you haven't never even had a conversation with that person.
Yeah.
You just know who they are from going to shows, so you say hello. I mean, there's so much of that. Like, that's amazing. There's so many people that I'm like, that I give a hug to. I'm like, what's up? How's the? You bullshit your way through a conversation. You know, but like, you don't really know much about them. You just know them because you would see them all the time. You had this camaraderie with them because of the scene, and then you don't even really know who they are. You just, you know, you just have that.
That's in the beginning of the Danny Diablo episode. Yeah. It's like, oh, I've seen you or whatever. You know, I'm like, name's George. Yeah. So like, I know he doesn't know me. I mean, faces, and then it's like, I get it.
Yeah, you're the guy from Silent Majority.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's definitely, you know, since I did shows, I think people would remember me because of that, you know, and because I look pregnant, because I have this fucking weird stomach, like, people remember me as the pregnant guy, which works in my favor, you know, it's trademark.
No one trying to fuck you. It's already pregnant. Yeah. So you get over this, like, big thing, like, obviously, like, most people that would get that obstacle, like losing $40,000, and I mean, at that point you might even look for a B plan. But from there, I guess, what do? You just move on, and like the Bamboozle Fest was like.
Well, so I became involved with John D. Who was a promoter from Jersey, who was on to like doing much bigger things than I was. You know, he was actually booking Birch Hill, and you know, when he found me, and he was like, "Hey, you have a great ear. You know things that other people don't know. You know, get involved with the Skate and Surf Festival, book a stage. You know, get involved with what we're doing, and we'll go from there." So I did, and
huge opportunity.
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool, and I never thought, you know, and I just did it. You know, so I did that, and then
and it's great when someone like that notices something that, you know, maybe you didn't know about yourself, or maybe you weren't too sure of, but like you do have a great ear, and like I think all three of us, would, have just growing up with music and all that other stuff. I think sometimes we take for granted, but here you get this guy telling you to come aboard and gives you an opportunity, which is fucking awesome.
But you know what? Like what I was saying before, I benefited from being part of a great scene. Like I benefited. Like I can't take credit for what was happening, but I benefited from it, because what literally happened back in the early 2000s was you had the scene that was just blowing up. Take It Back Sunday, Brand New, Glassjaw, The Movie Life, From Autumn to Ashes, then eventually, As Tall as Lions, Envy on the Coast. I don't want to forget anybody, but like all those bands. So obviously I was the one that was doing all the shows at that point, as the first big show that I ever did was Take It Back Sunday with 2,000 people, that was a big show, so as I'm doing this thing, people are starting to pay attention to Long Island. They're starting to be like, what the hell is happening? Like A&R guys, MTV, Fuse, zines, like all of these like entities that never thought about this little scene are now paying attention to like, what is going on? Why are these bands drawing thousands of people? Who is, who is part of this scene? So I guess my face was just identified with that because I was booking these shows. So I started getting phone calls from A&R guys and from different people being like, who are the bands that we need to pay attention to? So I definitely I was able to ride that wave, in the same time, in the early 2000s, I was given a show on WLIR. There was a ska show called One Step Beyond that this guy, Jay Wolf, did. He was a great dude. Unfortunately, they got rid of him and they hired me. And sucks because he hated me and I like him, but I get it, I would fucking hate me too. But they gave me a show on WLAR,
That's right.
And I called that show The Silent Earth to pay homage to Silent Majority. And I thought it was a great way to like just,
what year was that?
This was, I got hired by WLAR. That was 2002. This was right before I had the huge issue with the... I trained a little bit before they put me in there.
DRE at that point, or was it LAR?
I think it was LAR.
It was back to LAR?
Yeah, it was back to
DRE.
LAR. Yeah, it was back to LAR. 927 either way.
Mm-hmm.
That was like right at the pop, like the 2002.
Yeah, my friend, one of my good friends, Harlan Friedman, who's still one of my best friends, another guy, and again, you got to pay homage to people that like get you in the place that you're in,
Yeah.
And Harlan was a guy that, wasn't a scene guy, but just a music guy, and he just recognized something in me and he was like, you got to get involved in radio, and I was like, what? I never thought about that, but they gave me this radio show, and I was saying, you got to pay homage to the people that actually help you along the way because it's really important. And Harlan Friedman's one of my best friends now, and when I was like a promoter, he was involved with WLAR on the radio, and he was like, hey, you should do shows with WLAR, but also because at the time the Vanderbilt was a thing, and so he made that connection, and I did some shows with the Vanderbilt, and luckily because of the Vanderbilt, when the whole Sports Plus thing fell apart, I moved a bunch of shows to the Vanderbilt that was supposed to be at Sports Plus, so they definitely got my back.
I thought the Vanderbilt was great.
It was a good spot. So eventually I was involved. I was doing radio at the time, and I had my show, The Silent Earth, because of Harlan, and it was cool. And I definitely never did radio. I did not have a voice for radio. I mumbled and I stuttered, and my vocabulary wasn't great. But I was a radio guy because I just knew a lot about music, and they gave me my own show to go whatever I wanted to. And in the beginning, it was funny.
Did you get paid for that?
I got minimum wage. Yeah. For that show.
But still, you're talking about music. It's like...
It was great.
It's perfect. It's like for people like us, you could put me in a room for 10 hours and I could dissect an Alkaline Trio album. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it was cool.
Well, there's reasons why nobody does that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But yeah, right. But it was great because at the time when that show started in like I said, late 2002, early 2003, Long Island was in full bloom, we were in total plumage, there was so much stuff going on at that point. There was, whatever, a lot of bands were putting out records, and I was in that mix because of this show that I had and doing shows, whatever. So it was this amazing opportunity. The funny thing that I didn't know at the time was one of my best friends, Mike Dubin, who is part of a scene, a scene fixture. He was like the scene documentarian. He always took pictures. He keeps everything. He's just like that guy. Yeah,
still is. Whenever I miss a show, I just Watch his feed.
Yeah, he's amazing like that. He's always been that dude. He's definitely the AV squad, Long Island Hardcore AV squad, Mike Dubin.
Yep.
But I didn't know this at the time. So I was doing my show on WLAR. Dubin was having conversations with K-Rock, which was obviously a huge station, about doing a local show on K-Rock, because at the time, K-Rock was trying to figure out how do we capitalize on this huge music scene going on, And what Dubin didn't know, and what nobody else knew, that I was also talking to K-Rock. They called me up at the same point, and they were like, hey, it would be great to do a local show. We were both talking to K-Rock, not knowing. And at some point, because basically they were like, hey, we're going to do a local show and we're going to pick one of these guys. At some point, they realized me and Dubin were super tight, and they're just like, why don't we just fucking give the show to both these guys?
That's what I remember.
So me and Dubin in 2004 were given a show on K-Rock called Domestic Disturbance.
That's what I remember.
And that was fucking cool. That was really cool. It was like super funny. These two geeks that, really didn't have any formal training in radio. And we first started doing this radio show, and these guys that became our friends, these engineers from K-Rock, were like this kind of setup, literally with microphones and a board and a DAT tape, would go to Dubin's apartment in Ridgewood, Queens, and they would tape us, and me and Dubin would argue and we'd fight, and we just both didn't have any, we didn't have any rhythm. We just did not know how to speak on the air. And then eventually it just clicked, and the show was successful and popular, and a year and a half later, K-Rock went off the air.
Yeah. Wow, that's right. Oh, you're right, because 2006-ish.
Yeah, it was about 2006.
Stern
And you guys, you never wanted to do anything? I mean, you could do a podcast. You never wanted to do anything after that?
Listen, I have a ton of aspirations. My follow-through just sucks sometimes. I would love to do that.
We were doing a podcast.
Yeah. No,
for like a minute.
Yeah. No, I would love to do a lot of things, but unfortunately I just, work a lot. So it's difficult for me.
A night job too.
Yeah, no, it's
and a day job.
Yeah, of course.
I
work in an office, and then I go to shows at night, which is the same job. So it's a lot. It's definitely it's taxing. So it would be difficult. I would certainly like to do something creative like this at some point. I just don't know if it's ever going to present itself. About a year ago.
If only you had a band, you could book your band.
Well, we established the fact I can't sing, so that'll never happen again. But about a year ago, I got involved with Scene Mag from Long Island, which is like Bill.
Bill Axios.
And Al, who's an amazing writer. I really thought that was cool what they were doing, so I got involved with them. And every once in a while, I'm involved in the creative side with that, and I get involved with some writing. I mean, I'm definitely not as on top of it as I should be, but those guys do something awesome, and I thought it was really cool creatively to get involved and write again and do something pretty cool.
But does the business side of being so involved in the business side diminish when you want to do something artistic? Because sometimes it's the bands do well because the band member works in cubicle, and then they run to being in a band, but now that's what you do. And I'm curious if then when you go to do something artistic, does it feel diminished to some degree?
I think I had to figure out what artistically I could do that I was good at. Like I said, my first aspiration was to be in a band. I realized I wasn't good at that. So now at 42, I realized that I could write. I've always been a pretty good writer. I'm good in this format talking, that stuff I'm good at. So I would like to eventually pursue that, and it doesn't, to me, being involved in business doesn't diminish it. And in fact, it just makes me want to pursue something like that more. It makes me eventually, but just the time is killing me.
Just for the record, the podcast game, bar's pretty low.
I know.
You could just jump right in.
No, there's certain people. It doesn't make a difference who's listening. It's the thought that counts, right?
I always hear because I'm still a stern listener, and he hates podcasts. He hates
podcasts.
So he's always shitting on them.
Which is weird that somebody that likes the medium of sure.
I get it, just because it's one of those things where he's probably what the fuck did I just spend 50 years of my life doing when you could just go somewhere and buy something?
But that's the haircutter not liking Motley Crue, not liking Warren. You're just not.
But it's also
to the next
Bon
generation.
Jovi hearing some punk rock demo and being anybody can do that.
Oh yeah,
but not realizing that there's great bands like this, the Sex Pistols. It's just there's a whole measure of
Also,
podcasts.
Warrant's first 2 albums are pretty good. Just want to
pretty great. I don't know what she was talking about.
Yeah, just want to say shout out to
was
Janie
her name.
Lane.
She doesn't know. R.I.P. Janie Lane.
R.I.P. But definitely was a really good songwriter. Like the lyrics were some.
I don't know if it was a good song, but
I thought it was a great songwriter. I did.
Yeah,
I don't know.
pretty
Like the first 2 records. So
they hold a place in my heart for nostalgia. Like definitely. And it's funny too. You were talking before about how
George is a big Warren fan, right?
Yeah, save it for Red River.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's pertinent to this. It's like it's funny how talking about when you're really into like a certain kind of music, like you can't see. And I remember totally. I had a soft place in my heart for the hair metal stuff, but if it wasn't for that hair metal stuff, I would have never heard the Misfits. Like I never heard half the bands that I'm into now.
It was my gateway.
Yeah,
it was because it was just like I think maybe we're like a year off or something as far as ages go, but like I was like 8 or 9 listening to those bands and being like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah.
And then,
it's like the first time I realized like who the Beatles were was when I heard Motley Crue cover Helter Skelter.
Yeah.
Metallica, covered, like that 590 DP. They covered the Misfits. They covered, like Diamond Head. They covered amazing bands. And Megadeth also covered Sex Pistols. So it's like, by listening to those bands, that's how I eventually got into more things. Not only would you listen to covers, but I remember being a kid and buying like records or tapes and just looking at the thank you notes and seeing who the bands thanked.
Right.
And obviously, like if they thanked somebody, that was somebody I should know about. It's not things are not to knock on the back in my day, but it's true. It was just a different time, and you didn't have Spotify related artists to click on and be like, holy shit, I'm a fan of the Misfits, I'm also gonna like the Damned, the Sex Pistols, and the Exploited. That didn't exist back then. You basically had magazines, you had thank you notes, you had like the stores that had shirts, and you would look and see, or you would like rummage through records. That's how you would find out who bands were.
Right.
Different time.
Yeah, and like you appreciated it more, or maybe I did, because like with Spotify, which I love Spotify, but man, I don't remember the last time I sat and listened to a full album on Spotify all the way.
Really?
Through. Yeah, like I just click on one song and then I'm like, oh shit, you know what else came out? Oh shit, you know what else came out? And I listen so I basically just ping pong till I listen to the whole thing, but.
Well, you know what the cure for that is? It's Ritalin. Actually, it helps with ADD.
I think about that too. Is like how do young bands rebel now? Because you have great ways to get out your music, which we would love to have had back then. So maybe music's not as like big. You have many things you can do with your free time. So maybe music isn't as big, but how do young bands rebel now? Like they say, fuck it, I'm not going to be on Instagram. Do they,
But no, there's definitely bands that I could think of that like their music was hard. They might have a Bandcamp or a SoundCloud and they're not on Spotify or they're not on Apple Music. Sure, that exists, but it
doesn't feel like super rebellious. Like we're not going to be on a major label. We're going to take,
but
what do you do?
To spite your face at that point.
Yeah,
because while you might want to be rebellious, a lot of people aren't going to find out about you. Now, listen, sure, there's still scenes that exist where like it exists in the old way, like people distribute tapes or records. I mean, that still exists, of course. And as a 42-year-old guy, I don't know that.
That's not
sure.
Functional.
Well, it might be though. It might there might be some validity to that for like a 19-year-old kid that like doesn't want to listen to Spotify, that like that like wants a cassette tape or wants.
He's gonna say like, I'm gonna hand deliver each one of these records. And I'm not putting.
Well, I mean, I would imagine it's through shows. I'd imagine like there's certain bands that most of their music distribution is through their live shows. Just like we did back in the day.
And I'm sure you see some of those bands like even like some of like the SoundCloud rappers and stuff like that. You see those shows.
Well, what's pretty amazing too. I book a lot of hip hop. And I book a lot of country. And what's amazing about hip hop is that because of social media and because of streaming services, it happens so fast that there's guys that I've never heard of one week, and then the next week I'm fighting to get them because they're going to do 1,000 to 2,000 tickets. It's quick.
Amazing.
It's really incredible. Like when you actually like look at that. I mean, it's definitely a challenge to be on the forefront, to know like, hey, this guy's gonna be big, or this part, or guy or girl. Sorry, I mean now it's amazing because there's definitely girls are just as big as dudes. It's it's a great time to be alive. Everybody has equal opportunity. Everybody has a chance to be in music, but it's quick though. Like these things happen really fast, and sometimes you have to just be in the forefront and realize okay, this band that I couldn't tell you another song by them. This one song is going to get 10 million streams on Spotify, and I need to pay attention to who the hell they are, and because everyone's going to know them and I'm going to be left out. It's crazy. If you look at, I have this conversation a lot. If you look at festival lineups nowadays, that's a really great exercise. Look at a festival lineup nowadays, and I would guarantee you, if you're in our age bracket, you probably don't recognize 70% of the bands, like the small print. The bands on up you do, but the 70% on down you don't, because those are bands that are happening, that are have a song
I do
out,
that,
2 songs.
Picture my finger pointing at the screen, scroll
through
all and I go all the way down the whole thing, and I'm like, I recognize the top 2 names, and that's kind of it, and my finger just slides down the screen, and I'm like, I don't know anymore.
Yeah, because I mean, those are the bands that are they're kind of bubbling under, but then again, remember when we were 20-something years ago, that was we knew those bands.
Yeah.
We knew those bands. We were on it.
Somebody a few years older than us did not. Yeah. That's just the way it is. It's just
I remember one year going to Lollapalooza, and I was excited, and can't remember now, but I remember one year I was really excited because I wanted to see the second stage bands, and I remember Superchunk and Shudder to Think
were
on the super, and I was so excited
Flaming
about
Lips
that.
for me.
Yeah.
Second stage, and you're right, those bands. I just saw Superchunk 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, they played Barry. Yeah.
The best show I've seen this year.
Right.
It's still just amazing. But yeah, that's what it is at that age. So someone knows.
Yeah, but back then, which is so funny, is that but back then, 20-something years ago, they were those bands. They were not super commercially successful. They existed in our world. But we knew about them. So when we would go someplace and they were playing, we're like, yo, we got to go see this. That's what we want to see.
I saw Flaming Lips with 15 people on the second stage.
Yeah.
And then they just walked off and signed my notebook back when people got signatures, I guess. So
no selfie?
No. I don't think I would do that even today, to be honest.
But again, that's a funny hardcore thing that I remember was that one year I went to Lollapalooza, and I got a bunch of I saw Evan from Biohazard. He signed my shirt, and he probably thought this dude, right? He signed my shirt, and Angel from Fishbone signed my shirt, and I got all these people to sign my shirt, and I was with a bunch of hardcore dudes that were looking at me what are you doing? Because as soon as and then the months to come, when I got really into hardcore, I was like, wait, we don't do that. That's not something. We don't get autographs. We just hang out with people. We know band dudes. We know band people. We know people involved. We don't get autographs.
Right.
And I remember that that was something that was really hard for me to get that out of my head.
I almost never want to meet anyone. I just don't.
Yeah, if I met Paul McCartney, I don't think I'd get an autograph.
Yeah.
I got Mike Tyson's autograph because that was just funny.
Yeah.
But it's beyond irony. I wouldn't. I can't think of someone I'd be like, yo, can you sign this? Or even the selfie thing. I got a selfie with Bernard Getz.
That's awesome.
Again, it's
that's
how
cool.
could you not?
Yeah.
But if Billy Corgan walked up, I wouldn't. I'd
but
be
you
like,
don't want to talk to Billy Corgan.
You don't.
Right.
Especially not today.
Me and you had a conversation. I don't know if you remember this. Me and you had a conversation 20-something years ago about Trent Reznor. And I remember the example you gave to me was if you meet Trent, because I think I said to you, I referred to somebody as a dick, and you're like, just because you meet Trent Reznor on a bad day doesn't mean Trent Reznor's a dick.
Right.
I remember you said, I never forgot that. And that's something that stuck with me, because when you meet somebody who's a celebrity, who's somebody that brief encounter you have with them, that's going to change your perception.
That's the soul of what you think they are. And you're just handing them a ton of expectations that they don't have any business living up to.
Yeah. I say it all the time.
Record.
Meeting a celebrity who you really look up to is like sending a love letter to somebody who's not in love with you.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it means so much to you, but that person doesn't reciprocate. They're probably, they're like, oh, I get it. You ever get a love letter from somebody that you're not in love with? You're like, wow, it's really nice. I just don't feel the same way. I don't get what you're feeling. That's really sweet.
Just recently, I try not to fanboy to anyone because it's just weird and I just don't allow myself. But recently, just seeing Sam I Am, and I'm a huge fan. And all the other guys were cool, and then I was like, oh, there goes, Sergi. I was like, man, huge fan, blah, 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 blah. He was just like, that's cool. I'm just like, and that's fine. Good for him, like in my head. But in my head, I'm thinking like, God, why did I even bother? I should have just fist bumped him and been like, hey, man, good set.
And what do you say? It's like, you don't know what to say. Like, I remember the thing that's kind of crazy. I've been with my friends that are in bands, and people come up to them when I'm with them, and they show them their tattoo. Like, oh my gosh, look, I got your band tattooed on me. And the dudes would be like, that's great, thank you very much. You know, like, that's, to me, like, what do you say? You know, like, how do you reciprocate somebody getting your band tattooed on you because you're thankful and you're appreciative?
Right.
But unless we can take them out to dinner,
right?
You know,
it's almost like set up for failure.
Yeah, you're set up. There's nothing you can do. And you know, and one of the perspectives I have from doing this for so many years is that when you're around bands and you're around people of certain stature, not to take anything to heart. I mean, there's certainly people that I've met that were like, they just were having a bad day, or like, I mean, there's certain people that, certain people in bands I could tell you that I've met 20 times. They don't know who I am.
Right.
That's fine. Like, that's cool. I get it. I'm that person that, like we said before, I'm that face in the crowd that they just don't remember my name, and that's going to happen, but that doesn't make that person, like, that doesn't make their music any less valuable to me. Like,
I mean, you think of those artists too. Like, think of like Bruce Springsteen, right? Seems like he'd be a nice guy.
Sure.
But could you imagine what it would take to be at that level?
No.
Bruce Springsteen would have to be a self-obsessed maniac for at least 2 decades to be as big as he is, or Trent Reznor, or Perry Farrell, whoever is those, Lady Gaga or whatever. And maybe they get to some point where they're at the top and they start being nice. Like, I'm sure Paul McCartney's nice now, but in those years of like that grind, they're probably not that much fun to hang out with. Like, one of my favorite bands is Jane's Addiction. I don't think it would be a good time hanging out with Perry Farrell.
But you don't want to, because you're breaking that illusion.
But when you're young, it's like, oh, it'd be so cool to like meet that guy. But the reality is, for them to get to that level, they probably climbed over a lot of people.
It's funny. I since I've been lucky to start early with a lot of bands, and one of the things that I like, I'm really lucky about, and I'm sure people are sick and tired of hearing my fucking stories of way back when I booked this band when they did 100 people, because I have a million of those. Like, I've done a million bands that are now big that I've done.
Well, we are interviewing you.
Yeah,
it's a podcast.
So
go for it.
So one of the things that I always say is that I don't care who it is. I feel like every one of those bands has a full year when they're a dick. Like when it's really happening, when they're playing arenas, when they're all over TV, and they're not a dick because they don't like you. They're a dick because they're busy. Because because now not only do they, like, if you see them, they want to hang out with you, but they have a million things to fucking do.
Right.
It's not an example of your relationship with them or a slight towards you.
Right.
It's just like they have to be like that. And a lot of certain situations, they have to just cut themselves off and be like, yo,
everybody wants something from them. And it's like, you don't realize that when you're younger. It's like, oh, that guy's like a dick now. But it's like, everybody that approaches people on their way up, or if they're up or whatever, is somebody asking for something. Or maybe they get a lot of either hate or too much love. It's just like, it's just distorted.
Yeah.
So you can understand why people just cut off. They shut themselves off from that bullshit.
And certain people don't. Like, I'll give you a good story. Like, so, I talked that before when I lost all that money doing that U show. I lost $40,000. Later that fall, I was like trying to dip my toe back into doing shows, and I did a show for My Chemical Romance. And My Chemical Romance was on the cusp of being this massive band.
Yeah.
And the show didn't do well. I booked it in the wrong venue. It lost money. It was a big mess. And I went to pay the band after the show, and their manager at the time was like, we don't want it. I was like, what do you mean? This is your guarantee. And I don't know where I even pulled the money from, because I didn't have money. I just lost $40,000. But he's like, we don't want it. And I'm like, why don't you want it? They're like, dude, you're a friend. Like, we know what just happened to you. We don't want it. And this band, My Chem, who became this massive, massive band at the time, they didn't want the money from me. You know why? Because I had known them from like when we were doing stuff together, and still to this day, like when Gerard from My Chemical Romance played Irving Plaza a couple of years ago, shouted me on stage, like, what's up, Christian did the show, it's so cool.
That's
because
amazing.
Those guys remember, like there's certain guys that just never go through that dick phase,
right?
And even if they're busy, they just still recognize and remember the people that were there, you know, and that's one of the things that you have to always keep in mind is that, like, you know, the people that you see on the way up are the same people you see coming on the way down, you know, and I think about that all the time. It's like there's no reason why I should ever be an asshole to anybody because I don't know who that person is down the road,
right?
You know, and that, you know, that could eventually hurt me if I treat somebody differently because I think I'm better than them. I don't think I'm better than anybody. You know, and that's one thing that you got to keep in mind is that everybody's, you know, you might be a different position in your life, but you're not better than anybody, you know, and sometimes you have to keep that in mind because, you know, there's people that I can think of that were total dicks to me when I was coming up that I wouldn't fuck with. You know, like there's a couple of people from Long Island, you know, like a couple of producer guys that were you know, like that was in a shitty Long Island band that never went anywhere. Like he was a fucking dick to me when I was young because he was in a big band and I tried to book his band and he was a fucking total asshole to me. And years later when his band was like kind of fledgling, he you know, would try to befriend me. I was like, fuck that guy, you know, you know, and you remember those people that just aren't cool to you, you know, that write you off. It's not good to write anybody off, because you never know, you know, what's going to happen with somebody, you know.
Name of the podcast is If I Ruled the World. So what we pose to each of our guests is the question, if you rule the world, what would that look like?
Well, first, every time you say it, I got to get the Nas Lauryn Hill song out of my head, because every time you say it, I just get that song lodged into my head.
It'll be all over the editing job.
It'll be all over when we get sued.
See, that's a tough question because I feel like there's the answer that you want people to hear you say, and then there's the answer that you really want to say.
Well, look, think of the power of now.
Yes.
Just go for it.
If I ruled the world, I think that I would. Man, that's a fucking loaded question.
It is.
Holy
I couldn't answer it.
Yeah, me neither. Like when we thought of that idea, I was like, I'm glad I'm not answering that because
that's like when you see somebody attractive at a bar and you're like, let me go, and you just stop dead in your tracks and because you don't know what you're gonna say, you're a deer in headlights. I just was afraid to ask both of you out. I don't know. I'm stuck. That was scary.
I was about to ask out Chelsea Wolfe, and I was like,
not so much.
Okay, so if I ruled the world, I would definitely, Jesus Christ, I can't fucking answer. See, okay, there's the funny answer, you know,
guest list for everyone.
Yeah, if I ruled the world, you know, music would be available to everybody. Music would be
it already is available to everyone.
It's not.
Did you rule the world?
It's not because, you know, radio might be, but as technology advances, it's harder and harder for more people to access music. You know, think about it. When we were kids, cable, anybody can get cable. TV, regular TV. Anybody can get regular TV. You would hear stuff. Radio, you would hear. You know, I mean, even though I love Sirius XM, you know, and I think it's an amazing thing, not everybody can afford Sirius XM. You know, I mean, you know, not everybody has the means to listen to a radio now because regular radios, you don't go to a store and buy a radio. So, you know, people aren't exposed to music and things like they once were. So,
but I feel like everyone can stream anything. You got Spotify, you got YouTube, you got whatever.
What if you're broke? What if you have the money to do that? I mean, think about that for a second. There's people that can't afford the internet. There's people that can't afford that stuff.
In America?
Definitely.
Well, we are talking about the world. All right, but this is your version of it. Sure. So I'm not going to...
So, you know, I think that,
you would bring Janie Lane back?
Yeah. If I ruled the world, I mean, I would, I would make soup dumplings available everywhere in America because soup dumplings are amazing.
That's that Flushing shit right there.
Dude, I'll say this. One of the things that I feel like I'm so lucky to do is grow up in New York because you were exposed to so many different cultures, and you were exposed to so much. You know, I'm glad I grew up in West Hempstead, where you know, where I had a very diverse mix of cultures.
Shout
you know,
out to the Music Palace.
Yeah, where when I was a kid, you know, I definitely had friends that listened to every style of music because I had friends from every walk of life.
Right.
You know, I had friends that that didn't eat mashed potatoes and steak for dinner, that ate beans and rice or plankton or whatever else. You know, that was something really important to me, that I did as a kid. So, you know, so I think that's extremely important. And if I ruled the world, I would think that everybody should be exposed to culture. Everybody should be exposed to something that's not, like, you know.
Oh, that's a great answer.
Yeah. Soup dumplings for everybody.
Soup dumplings for everybody.
I think I didn't know where we were going, but that's a great answer. Like to
Thank
be
you.
completely exposed, because I think the same way. Like super lucky to be living in New York, to walk through Astoria, to like anywhere in Queens, anywhere on like maybe not so much Long Island, but you know anywhere else like around, and you're exposed to so much. I love it.
See, but that's really why it is a Rorschach test, because it seems like a big question, right? If I ruled the world, if you ruled the world, what would you do? And then little by little, people kind of chip away at the answer, and then you find out who they are.
Yeah.
And the answer is like diversity with Christian. Some of the other guests are talking about beating up their friends. You know, you just find out who they are.
That is true.
That's
happened.
What was
Gore-Tex said he wanted to blow up the world.
Blow up the world. You know, it really is a Rorschach test to like who you are.
But again, going back to what we talked about before about like narratives and characters and who we are. Like I think that, you know, when you ask that question, it's really easy for the character that you are to answer that question.
Yeah.
You know, like,
you're right.
Because immediately when you ask me that, you know, I think of the character that I am. I'm a 42-year-old guy that loves the Muppets, Marvel movies, wrestling, and Star Wars. You know, like, and I would immediately say, okay, I think everybody should get Star Wars toys for free.
Right.
You know, but that's not really how I think, but that's the character, Christian Mcknight, you know, who's this, you know, who I have this, like, ridiculous internet, you know, this ridiculous IG persona where, like, every single fucking Instagram picture that I put up, I write "this is," because that's just my that's my Instagram persona. You follow me on Instagram, right?
I'm not on Instagram.
Okay,
He's not.
Anyway, but
follow
everything
him.
I do, it's this is because that's in my mind. I'm like, I'm this person. This is what I do. This is my
That's your
Instagram
story.
persona. That's my story. That's my narrative. You know, and it's funny, but because when you ask that question, hey, what would you do if you ruled the world? I immediately almost answered as the character Christian and not the person.
Right.
May the force be with you.
Does that make sense? You got
No,
that?
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
The sweet spot is knowing the difference.
Yeah.
Because your character is important sometimes. Sometimes you use that character to get things. You ask for your raise as your character. You ask for this as your character. You get dates as your character. But you know this is what you're doing. You're using this to get that, and you're aware of it. It's the when you don't know, you think that character is you. Yeah. And you don't know the difference. Is sort of the trick.
And that's funny you say dating, because I feel like that's a common thing. Like how many times like you know like in your life where like you feel like you meet somebody and you put on this act, and when the person gets to know you, you're not that person, and they're disappointed. You know, it's like
100%.
I got somebody disappointed in me right now at home.
Right. So we'll end it so she's not.
All right. Well, yo, I more than appreciate being given the opportunity to do this. I think what you guys are doing is amazing. You're telling our story. It's very fucking cool. I more than appreciate it, and I more than appreciate the look of getting this. Also, I would be remiss of me not saying that we are in the office of Radio in Vaux, owned by Dan Valentino, Sal Mignano, Eric Finneran, and the chef Mike Ombre. And they have an amazing fucking thing going on here. Amazing thing. These like bunch of local scene kids opened up a bunch of, you know, places, you know, Amityville Music Hall, Za Pizzeria, Leaky Lifeboat. I mean, these dudes. Radio. Like, I am fucking so proud of these dudes and what they're providing for Long Island. And like, you know, I feel like it's just an extenuation of what we did years ago. Like now they've provided these spots where dudes that don't listen to, you know, disco or techno or whatever, that like, you know, it's these amazing, really good restaurants where you go and 11 o'clock at night you can get fucking vegan wings and listen to a Vale on the radio. Like it's fucking cool what these guys are doing. So I definitely have to give those guys a big shout out.
They did. They hooked us up with a spot.
This is amazing.
Thank you to them. Thank you, Chelsea Wolf. Thank you, Ministry.
Thanks, Al Jorgensen. Thank you, Christian. We've been wanting to do this for a while.
Yes.
Appreciate you letting us pick your brain a little bit.
Yeah.
And we'll edit out anything bad that you said about all the scenesters.
All right.
If I ruled the world, I love them, baby.